Hi, everyone. Welcome in. Well, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for coming. I'm Tara Green, and I'm going to be the session host for today. The topic, as you can see, is sustainable employment, connecting employment and relationships. We also have Marley Case here as our tech host. She's hosting the Zoom room, so if you have any tech questions, please message her in the chat. We'll have the chat open today, so if you have questions or comments, please feel free to put them in there, and we'll see where we can work those into the conversation or save time at the end. We're going to record today's session like we usually do, so that it'll be on the Btcc website, and any other resources will be there, and you can come back and look at it if you want a second listen to get more of the details. I know that we're coming back from a lunch break, so if you haven't had a chance to get the sustenance that you needed, please feel free to continue meeting your own needs as we meet together. We'll ask folks to stay on mute if they can until it's appropriate for them to jump off mute to share their thoughts and join in conversation. So we'll get started with Katie Hopkins, who's come to us today with South Central Community Action Program. Katie, thank you for sharing today. We're glad to have you here.
Thanks, Tara. Thanks for inviting us and letting us participate in the MC3 this year. I'm excited to be back. And yeah, we are, my name is Katie Hopkins, and I am the Community Support Coordinator for South Central Community Action Program's Thriving Connections Initiative. And today we're going to be talking about sustainable employment, which is one of the many things that we focus on within Thriving Connections with the families that we serve. It is a community-based sort of concept. We have, over the years, put this together, so it is, of course, still developing and still changing, and I fully anticipate that I will learn things here today and take them back, and this will look different tomorrow. So thanks to SCAP for supporting us, and thanks to our community partners. The Smithville Foundation has funded us to be able to do some free workshops outside of Thriving Connections. Usually all of our stuff is internal, but we have been lucky enough to be able to go out and talk about sustainable employment with other organizations this year, and that's been great. The Anthem Foundation gave us some money to be able to dedicate the time and resources within Thriving Connections to developing this. And the United Way of Monroe County has given us, they held a volunteer day and they packed a bunch of career kits for us. So anytime we go out and do a workshop, we get to give away free career kits. Very fun. So what we're going to try to cover today, I'll give you a very brief intro into SCAP Thriving Connections for those who aren't familiar with us. We have our own little group guidelines. I'm going to try to kind of walk you through the journey that we went through to get to where we are today with sustainable employment, tell you what that means, tell you some of the topics within employment that we are exploring and what we kind of think that looks like for our next generation. So South Central Community Action Program has been in Monroe County for more than 55 years. We cover Monroe, Owen, and Brown, and we also house Head Start, Energy Assistance, Weatherization, the Housing Choice Program, and Growing Opportunities. We have been virtual within Thriving Connections since March 2020, and are still doing virtual and some in-person programming. So the cool thing about coming to Monroe County Childhood Condition Summit is that I know that we share a lot of the same values with a lot of the people who are here presenting. And I love coming back every year and seeing what everybody's been working on. I think we align really well. I feel pretty supported and inspired professionally by the work that's being done by the people presenting here today. And as I was preparing for the summit, I was looking at the Btcc website. And I noticed that, you know, they have a very similar concept of what we have with our group guidelines. And I loved what they talked about in terms of creating a safe space, but going further and creating a brave place. I think I'm going to borrow that and call them working agreements. I think that's pretty cool too. We all have a little bit different language, but it's a lot of the same sort of spirit. So for us, we have a rule that we presume good intentions, that we stretch ourselves. So if you're somebody who's a talker, we ask that you stretch yourself by listening a little more. And if you're someone who's shy or, a little more introverted and doesn't know if they want to participate, we encourage you to step up in any way that you can. So feel free to either, do that in the chat or to do that verbally if you want. And then the other thing that we have throughout all of our cohorts is we've had a shorthand called ouch, oops, oh, and it sounds kind of hokey, but it is just a way for us to have code words for when we have said something or when we need to address something with someone else, so that we're not afraid to do that. So with our meetings, if somebody says something, somebody can say ouch, and that just means, hey, afterwards we're gonna check in and we're gonna reflect on that and talk it through. That way it doesn't bubble up. And I fully anticipate that there could be things that I say that you all could ouch me on later, and that's okay. I love it. I'm always down to get together privately afterwards or however you feel and talk through stuff. So those are our guidelines. To jump in here, I feel like I was at the workshop this morning on the work on self-care, and I feel like this is it's aligning pretty well with that. We are looking at messages within Thriving Connections around employment, and the kinds of conversations that we were having when we became Thriving Connections after being Circles for 5 years. We were looking at some of the things that we wanted to keep and some of the things that we wanted to leave behind. And one of those was some of the messages that we were hearing around employment that weren't working for us. We were going to a lot of workshops and being invited and having people come and talk to us who wanted to do motivational stuff. They wanted to help us get jobs. They wanted to tell us how to be attractive to the employer. And those are all very helpful, but we felt like it wasn't enough. And we felt like in some cases, some of those messages were causing more harm. And so these are the things that we looked at. And I would just be curious from you all, and again, chat or Mike, if these are messages that you have heard on the screen, and do you think that they would be helpful, harmful, or does it kind of depend on, could it be either?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I can definitely speak to this. As a Black woman who works in a predominantly white organization, it has been said to me that I have to work 10 times harder than everyone else to get the same benefits. And I find that I'm suffering as far as like mental health and emotional health when I try to kind of reach those expectations. But those, I will say, those messages are really repetitive, especially to people of color when you're working in spaces that not a lot of other people look like you. So harmful.
Thank you, Toya.
Yeah, Kate says it perpetuates a culture of competition. It goes along with a scarcity mindset that we think we've got to get it before somebody else gets it kind
Yes.
of attitude, in comparison to the collective care that you mentioned in the session before.
We were finding that it was, something that could short term feel, empowering, to have these bumper sticker sorts of things to motivate you. But the long term, it was taking quite the toll on the self-esteem. The message felt like, we felt like we were working hard. And we were. And we felt like we were able to get jobs and we just couldn't hang on to them, or they weren't sustainable, which is where the sustainable aspect of sustainable employment comes from. They were not good long-term solutions for employment. So we kind of decided to, ditch some of these messages and get to the core of what was reality for us and say, acknowledge we are working hard, but we're not seeing the economic stability that we're told that you get when you work hard. So what's the disconnect, and what can we do within Thriving Connections to help each other get through that, navigate that, and eventually find something that works for us. So these are two of our captains, Asia and Eliza. Asia has been a captain for 5 or 6 years. Eliza's a newer captain from our most recent cohort that did their entire 20-week training virtually. So they are some really, really impressive and amazing humans. And they both allowed us to record their thoughts on what sustainable employment meant to them. And so while you're listening to them, I would like for you to think about for yourself personally, what your needs from employment are, what your relationships with your employers need to look like in order for you to have a long-term sustainable situation.
Went into that decision was how I feel when I know that I have to go there in the morning. For me, one of the biggest benefits, or one of the ways that I'm able to stay motivated for my job, is just knowing that we're helping a lot of people who really need it. And so I think motivation and passion are both things that play into knowing if the job's a good fit. Being able to communicate with your coworkers and your superiors, and being able to be somewhere where you can be yourself. That's it.
Hi, my name is Eliza, and I think that sustainable employment in Bloomington definitely goes into several different aspects. So basically, one things that parents worry about is to be able to go to work, earn an affordable living for our children and ourselves to maintain our home. 2, to be able to afford childcare and our bills and rent/mortgages while we work. I find that sustainable employment in Bloomington, they don't go hand in hand. I feel as if the wages do not coincide with the cost of living. And parents struggle to work and also to be able to pay bills on time. I think a good way that could be helped is maybe constantly looking at the cost of living versus what income wages are. I know that I've worked a full-time job before and still couldn't afford, bills on time. And that was making the average wage.
Okay, so you heard two different perspectives on sustainable employment, and I'd be curious to see for you all, what is something that you need, that you feel like you have to be getting out of a job for it to be sustainable and a long-term good situation for achieving economic stability.
I'll jump in while others have a minute to think about it. When Asia said the phrase "to be yourself," it also made me think. I thought about that when Eliza was talking about childcare, because many of us will put our identity as a parent pretty top in front of the decisions that we make. And if the employment arrangement or hours don't allow us to be the parent that we need to be, we get a mixed match and something has to give. So that's foremost on my mind. Can this job or this position or whatever it is match with what other responsibilities that I already have in this world?
Yeah, and each of our captains has very individual situations that different things are going to be more important or less important, and different things will mean more to them. And so what we ended up coming up with for coaching is just kind of laying it out into categories. And then these are things that the participants are personally evaluating when we are doing some employment conversations or coaching. We're talking about current jobs. We'll talk about, you know, evaluating whether a potential job could be a good move. Trying to shift the conversation from, you know, this is a good, bad employee or employer, and just figuring out how do we organize our thoughts around whether or not this is a good fit for me or not a good fit. And so we are defining sustainable employment as employment that is safe. And so we will talk about whether or not it is physically and mentally safe for us in that environment. If there is a culture where we can be ourselves, if it is a culture that appreciates diversity and equity and uses our experiences to build a stronger workplace. Is it stable? So we talk about consistent hours, pay, benefits. How much will I need to find childcare? Is that something that I will have to, and will I be able to find consistent childcare? Will it be worth it? How much time and money will transportation cost me to get to this job? Then we're talking about whether or not it's fair. Are we doing the work that we agreed to do? Are we going to be compensated if they ask us to take on additional responsibilities? Are we being trained and given the tools that we need to do the job well? So many are getting into jobs, and because there's all sorts of, you know, reasons for it. People are short-staffed, whatever the situation is, but all of that weight is falling onto our employees that, you know, are people that we serve. And so what we're saying is, we're going to evaluate that, we're going to rank that, and we're going to take that into consideration. Is our leadership supportive? So do they support me? Do they work with me? Do they treat me with respect and appreciation? Do they feel approachable to me? Does their communication style work for me? Are they using my skills and talents? Or are there skills that I feel like are not being used that could be used? And is it a living wage? So we've gone pretty deep into living wage because there are different measures, and everybody agrees that the federal poverty guidelines are outdated. But we are trying to come up with, you know, who we want to align with in terms of what we understand as the living wage. And then we talk about the cliff effect. So for those who are familiar, that's the thing that happens when you take the new job or you receive a raise, and you're making enough to not qualify for some of the benefits that you've come to rely on. And actually then your net is kind of below zero. So if you lose your childcare voucher or you lose your health insurance, it may not be worth it for the raise that you got. And so that's something that we have to look at and evaluate with every person that we talk to. Is there's no judgment about, you know, needing food and needing childcare and needing healthcare. Those are things that we all need. And if we don't have them, we're not going to do a good job for you anyways. So weighing those things out and not being afraid to talk about them has been important, and then learning to talk about them with our employers. This is the kind of chart that we go through with everyone. So everybody gets to rank the job that they're either looking at or the job that they're in, on a personal scale from 1 to 5 about how they feel about how safe that workplace is, how stable it is, etc. And what we find is that there's, decision making becomes really difficult for us when we have jobs that rank really high in one area and then pretty low in other areas. And that can be really hard for people to kind of figure out what they want to do and where they need to go. So I'd be curious if that has ever been the experience of those of you here, if you've ever had a job that you felt like probably would have ranked low in some of those areas, but they ranked really high in other areas.
I've certainly been in a job or two where I was maybe personally fulfilled, like it touched on my capabilities or my things I had to share with the world, but the compensation wasn't there. So yeah, I've seen that.
Yeah, we have, yeah, go ahead.
Okay. I was just going to say yes as well. And I think it changes over time. For example, if you have children or parents you're trying to care for, you may need more flexibility than if you don't have those as part of your life.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And making those decisions is so, so difficult. And the weight that a person will feel in making those decisions. We revisit this a lot, and we've had some pretty good results. I think, it's never easy, but the way that it helps us frame the conversation is sort of moving our needle in terms of people being able to see it clearly and see their own situation. I know that I was working with somebody recently who, back at the beginning of the year was ranking the safety in their job at like a 2, but the using their skills and talents was like a 4 or a 5. And so it was like, I really like what I do. I feel like I make a difference. But I'm going to try and, I want that 2 to become a 3. And I'm going to try and have a conversation with, my employer about what I need to make it a 3 or a 4. But what ended up happening was it became a 1. And so we started putting that resume out because we had already agreed if in 6 months this hasn't become better, then that's what we're going to do. But she felt so much guilt about doing that. And so again, that community, that collective care of being able to kind of have this conversation and define it for yourself was pretty helpful.
Kate mentioned healthcare in the chat. I think a lot of us probably know somebody who stayed at a job because of the health benefits. And when we talk about community conditions, and obviously in this case, we're talking about employable ages, but we know that having stable employment or stable income creates a condition that is supportive of youth for growing up.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, sometimes it's the benefits that are keeping us there. And I think another one of the things that we've sort of kind of had to work through is that feeling of loyalty to our employer and feeling like, we owe it, and that all of those things that are falling on us, responsibility wise, that's just what we have to do. And we're encouraging people to kind of kick that up, back up the chain. Those are things that do not have to fall on you. And we can try and set boundaries and make plans. Also sort of getting out there and just being open to other opportunities sometimes plants the seed that there could be something else. I could envision a job where I had more safety or I had more stability, and being open to those and recognizing those opportunities. So some of the other sustainable employment workshop topics that we have, dived a little deeper in on and talked either at our community weekly meetings or in, separate workshops about, again, that living wage. We've talked about what the federal poverty guidelines are, where those came from. So many people are confused about it because every different kind of government benefit has different eligibility criteria, and they're all basing, most of it on the federal poverty guidelines. But everybody agrees it's inadequate. Otherwise, we wouldn't have to have programs that are based on 150% of the FPL or 200% or 138% for this one. So we talk about that. And then we talk about ALICE is the United Ways acronym for the asset limited, income constrained, and employed. So basically kind of what we have understood in the past is our working poor. And when we look at our numbers in terms of who that affects and who that applies to, it's a pretty big number versus what the Economic Policy Institute and MIT are saying are living wages. MIT for Monroe County, I think for an individual, the living wage is like $17 an hour for one person. And that starts shooting way up when we start adding other people into the household. We also talk with other groups about cliff effect planning. So planning for it, just literally going in together and listing out what the benefits that we have are and where we're going to get cut off so that we know where those boundaries are and we know how to plan for it, or maybe it helps us make a decision. We have questions that you can ask in an interview. So oftentimes we have folks who go in and do the interview and they feel like that's only for the employer to decide if they want them. And we're encouraging people to have questions that will help them identify if this is going to be a good fit for them or if it's, not. Adjusting to the new job, we have templates for helping people work through, the adjustment, the emotional adjustment to a new job, the logistics of having a different schedule or helping your children go through the transition of your new job. We have a boundaries in the workplace session that we do with a licensed mental health counselor. We've gotten a digital equity grant from the city. And so we've talked about digital equity and inclusion and how tech affects your options and your ability to participate in employment and education. We've started exploring financial trauma this year and helping people understand how being financially abused or having financial trauma will affect your outlook and your ability to budget and work and understand what you want to do. And then we connect everybody to local community resources. The one thing you won't see on here is resumes and interviews because we've got a lot of great people in Bloomington who can help out with resumes and interview prep. And so the last thing I wanted to touch on, since we are at a youth summit, is how we are connecting this to our next generation. What we're seeing from our teens and our young people. As you can see, Gen Z is already entering the workforce and in force. And I love our Gen Z. But there are some narratives out there about them that I think we should be careful and we should be on the lookout for. And so I'm going to play a little video and I'll probably stop it at a weird spot, but I'm going to play a little video just to kind of show you some of the narratives that are coming out. And then I'm going to ask you if you've heard anything and what you think that's going to mean for employment.
So you've heard about quiet quitting, which is the new modern trend where employees essentially stop trying, but they remain on the job, attempting to sail by on minimal effort, doing the bare minimum. This was a movement pioneered by Gen Z with a big assist from millennials who are always eager to join any trend, especially one that involves being lazy. Of course, I say the movement was pioneered by Gen Z, but they in fact did not invent laziness, though they are the only generation maybe narcissistic enough to think that they did. No, they invented the phrase and the hashtag and the TikTok videos promoting it. And now the makers of quiet quitting are back with a new hit called hashtag Act Your Wage. This is another viral trend, which is essentially the same thing as quiet quitting, sort of taking the Marvel approach where the sequel is a carbon copy of the original. The Act Your Wage trend, which has taken off on TikTok, is apparently best explained by this viral video, which has millions of views, from TikTok user Sarai Marie. Let's take a look.
Do you even know how to do your job? I don't understand what... Hey, Veronica, I'm gonna have you take this home and work on it tonight, okay? Respectfully, Susan, I'd rather spend time with my family. Veronica, did you just decline the Zoom meeting that's at 6:30 tonight? Oh, yeah, I did. I did do that. Yeah, because it's outside of my working hours, 9 to 5, so I won't be attending. All right, Veronica, I do need you to be available during your vacation, okay? Susan, you'll be blocked on my vacation because I won't be answering. Okay, Veronica, I'm gonna need you to complete all of this today. Susan, do I look like two people to you?
No.
Oh, okay, just making sure, because that looks like the work of two people, right? And I'm one. I'm just one person, right? And it's time to go home, 5 o'clock. Hey, thank you, bye.
It would appear that acting your wage means being so grating and annoying and shrill that you end up sitting alone in an empty corner of the office because everybody else has jumped out the window. Now, if you're still confused about what this movement is supposed to be, the New York Post has more details. Quote, the video is tagged Act Your Wage, a hashtag that has amassed 37.6 million views and counting on TikTok. It's part of a movement among young workers to only do what they're paid for and no more, and to urge their coworkers to do the same. Proponents of Act Your Wage see it as setting a firm, healthy boundary in the workplace. Acting your wage might sound similar to quiet quitting, which became the biggest buzzword in the office as the summer came to an end, but there's a fine line between the two movements. Quote, motivation is the bridge between the two, but they're still two very different and separate constructs. Maisha Ann Martin, head of people analytics of the software company WorkHuman, told the Post, in short, quiet quitters are doing the bare minimum and trying to get away with it, while the Act Your Wagers are doing exactly what they're paid to do, not more and not less. So, I mean.
Okay, so I don't know if anybody else has heard some of those narratives, but I'm curious if you have and if you've heard other ones, and if what you think that, do you think that that is aligning with what you see in our Gen Z and some of our millennials, or do you feel like something else is kind of happening there? And what do you think sustainable employment is going to mean to our younger generation?
Go ahead, Toya.
Oh, okay. So I have heard the narrative that younger people are lazy, but I also understand like the workforce has changed. You can essentially get on Instagram and have a following and make funds off of that, but also there's more of a community of being empowered by telling folks their worth, which I've never seen this video, but that girl, she's my new favorite. I really love that video. Because I mean, some of the things she was saying that, yeah, that's part of self-care. You don't pay me outside of these hours. Why should I do these things? But to take that as a negative is also really surprising, or however, I don't know who this gentleman is, but how he's kind of spewing it as this is negative behavior. But yeah, I've heard the laziness, but I haven't necessarily heard this spin on it.
Yeah, I've seen, sorry, go ahead.
I was bothered by what I thought he was trying to do was to pair boundary setting with disrespectful behavior. Like, I mean, like the eating the bag of chips, like at the cubicle, and like, I felt like they were trying to make that seem like a, you know, that's kind of a maybe a disrespectful behavior in a workspace with boundary setting. And you can have boundaries and that can be respectful and respectable.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting reading some of the LinkedIn articles and things about the framing it as laziness, to make it sound like having boundaries is a bad thing, or that having boundaries makes you not a good employee. That's really interesting. Yeah, I think a lot of people are really upset about how comfortable some of our young people feel with setting boundaries that are healthy. That doesn't seem like rocket science to me, even though I've not been somebody who has always set boundaries for myself, but I'm super excited that they are. Yeah. Anybody else have any thoughts on what they think sustainable employment is going to look like, or what that will mean to people coming out of high school and people coming out of college?
I think it's interesting too that like she flagged in that video that what she was doing in her time off was spending time with her family.
Mm-hmm.
And as we see that it's more crucial now than ever that two parents in the household work and work full time, children are spending less time with their families as a result across the board. And to see that like that still isn't respected as something that we need to take into account as part of the workplace, like shows just how little we're thinking about those boundaries and what they really mean for a family, because she's not just going and being lazy, she's going and being with her family and taking care of them.
Yeah, very reasonable boundaries. And I like the way that this is translated into social media and TikTok. Anybody who's interested in knowing what Gen Z thinks doesn't have to look very far. They're telling you very clearly. And I think it's like she's gone viral because she's able to be funny about it and still make her point. And I think she's making that point really, really well. I had seen her on TikTok before too, and my daughter follows her. So it's the online community for talking to people about what's okay and what's not okay in an employment situation. I think it's going to have an impact. I really do. So let's see. Nope. There we go. I want to wrap up with some acknowledgements and some appreciations, because talking about sustainable employment and developing things that work for our families is not possible without our community, first of all, our participants, our volunteers, and our advisory group members who are community partners, for volunteering their time and creating those brave spaces, sharing experiences, and collaborating with us. I'd like to thank the Indiana Coalition Against Domestic Violence. I have been, coming to MC3 for years now, and safe, stable, nurturing relationships has become a framework that we measure things against. And when we look at this and we look at employment, it's only natural that we would want to scaffold those relationships that we know are important for preventing abuse and neglect in childhood into adulthood. I'd like to thank Btcc for the E4 framework for helping us continue to evaluate ourselves, and the National Fund for Workforce Solutions. If you haven't heard of them, look them up on the web. They are the research that we constantly kind of look at and make sure that we have support for what we're doing. It's also, we have a personal connection there. One of our former coaches is now the director of workforce success for them. And so she has taken some of the things that, she learned with us up into these great spaces. So thank you and much appreciation to all of them. And of course, if anybody wants to go deeper on any of those topics with us at Thriving Connections, please feel free to reach out. My email is there at the bottom. You can reach out to myself or Linda Patton, my manager. And we will tailor any kind of employment workshop that you want to have, either for your staff or for folks that you work with. That's all I have for everybody. I appreciate everybody showing up. I know the virtual stuff is hard because we've been doing it for so long and some of us are kind of over it, but it's also very convenient, I think, for a lot of people. So I appreciate Btcc for hosting it and offering both of these options. And I hope everybody got something out of this today. Look forward to seeing you around.
Thank you so much, Katie. You know, I'm glad you mentioned that about the virtual, because I'll be honest, this isn't a topic that I feel like I have much impact on, that I have much power to use to change things. I don't employ people, and I don't influence that space much. But what it did give me the perspective of is how employment creates conditions in which children are learning and growing and developing. And that's the piece that helps me understand more. As I work with kids or as I work with families, now I can be a little bit more sympathetic because I understand a little bit more about how conditions of employment influence the conditions of the children. So I appreciate that perspective as someone who's coming at this from a little bit of a different angle. And I appreciate those of you who've joined here. And I hope if you have some things that you'd like to share about this session or anything else that you've joined in with today, that you'll stick around for the 2 o'clock, because that's where we have a chance to mix and mingle and share some more ideas in a little bit of a different format if you want to. But for now, we'll wrap up this time together, and you know where to find the next link. Go back to the Btcc website and you'll find your options for the last session from a community member for 1:15. Your links will be there, and then we'll get together lastly at 2 o'clock. So thanks everybody for being here. I'll see you around.